Welcome to this second season of Altea Talks, the dedicated podcast being brought to you by Altea, the unique provider of combined insurance and risk management solutions designed exclusively for the medical, allied health and care sectors. I'm your host, Will Marshall, and I'll again be joined in this second series by some of the leading figures from across the sectors. My guests are going to include practitioners and professionals, regulators, clinical risk and governance specialists, and an array of legal experts who are going to help us get to the heart of the hottest topics affecting health and social care sectors today. So, if you're looking for frontline knowledge and expertise, if you want valued insights into these most dynamic, challenging, and rewarding of sectors, then look no further because you're in the right place. Welcome again to Altea Talks. Hello and welcome to this episode of Altea Talks, the dedicated health and care sector focused podcast brought to you by Altea, the leading provider of insurance and risk management services to those sectors. My name's Will Marshall. I'm the head of legal and risk management at Altea, and I'm delighted this week to be joined by Professor Vic Rayner. Professor Rayner OBE is Chief Executive of the National Care Forum, having joined the organisation in 2016. As CEO, she chairs the Government National Workforce Advisory Group. In addition, she chairs the National Social Care Advisory Group on social care and technology, and has been at the forefront of promoting digital transformation across care. She sits on a range of government and national specialist groups with a focus on the social care workforce, digital transformation, new models of care, and regulation. Professor Rayner has recently stepped down from chairing the working group of the APPG, All-Party Parliamentary Group. Is that right?
Very good.
Yes,
yeah.
Jolly good. On adult social care. She's a regular and international speaker and has extensive knowledge and expertise across a wide range of care, support, housing and social policy agendas. Prior to joining the NCF, Professor Rayner was the CEO of Citra, a leading national membership body championing excellence in housing, health and care and support. Vic is also the incoming chair of the Global Ageing Network and has worked extensively with international partners on key areas of innovation and change. She's the current chair of the Care Provider Alliance, a role she will hold until next month. Mm-hmm. In addition, she was awarded an honorary professorship in health sciences by City University, working closely with the My Home Life programme and the wider university agenda around ageing and care. She was awarded an OBE for services to social care in 2021. Professor Rayner, very warm welcome to Altea Talks and thank you for coming along.
Thank you.
I thought maybe we could start today's episode by, if you don't mind, giving us a bit of an overview of your work with the National Care Forum and the Care Provider Alliance.
Yes.
And maybe start with the National Care Forum.
Yeah.
And I know that the NCF has campaigned strongly on fair funding, workforce pay parity with the NHS, and sort of generally integrating social care into wider health reform. How has it managed to keep these issues visible with both the government and the public?
So the National Care Forum is a sort of unique organisation in a sense amongst the sort of trade bodies because our focus is only on not-for-profit care. And that gives us some additional narrative to keeping those stories in both the public and the government agenda. So we work with members who deliver all different types of adult social care. So that includes nursing homes, residential care, day services, home care, extra care, supported housing, retirement living, you name it, we've got members doing it. And of course, that's really helpful when you're trying to explain a very complex system like social care, because whatever somebody thinks of as social care, we've got a member who does it. And so we can bring to life the stories that people need to hear in order to understand what social care does. It's really concerning how little the public actually understand the role of social care and the way in which it can transform people's lives. And I think that's what National Care Forum members do very well. They can explain that, they can make it a sort of living reality, and they can showcase that. With government, the way we do it, I think, is a lot of evidence. So we work with our members to gain information from them, to gain case studies from them, to gain realistic data from them about the impact potentially of policy changes, what that might do to services, how to create innovations and different ways of doing things. And lots of them are really interested in looking at what future needs will be. So they're busy developing service models and types. And of course, that's really engaging for governments as well, who should have an eye on what the next 5 to 10 years will bring.
Thank you. Yeah. And the National Care Forum, the NCF, is a member of the Care Provider Alliance. Is that right?
So we're a member of the Care Provider Alliance, and the Care Provider Alliance is made up of 10 national bodies who cover a range of interests, some sort of specialist models of care. So people like Home Care Association are part of that, Shared Lives Plus, and other broader trade bodies like Care England, National Care Association, who cover a whole range of different, perhaps larger services or smaller organisations. So we come together as the Care Provider Alliance. And what we try to do is to identify areas where, particularly in government context, policy changes are going to have a collective impact on the whole sector. And using the alliance, we cover 95% of all providers. We can tell the story of what is happening on the ground.
So it's quite a sort of broad and varied membership then?
Yes, it is. I mean, the members of the Care Provider Alliance are the trade bodies. But yes, that allows us to engage, if it's a place-based issue. So if it's, for example, in a particular region of the country that something's happening, then we'll be able to galvanise members across that alliance in that area. If it's a particular specialism, then again, we can pull together members from all those different organisations. So we've focused on a lot of different issues that your members would be interested in. So during COVID, we were looking at issues around insurance, for example, how that might impact the delivery of care in specific types of services. We're interested in obviously lots of areas around cyber risk and those kind of things. So where the impact will be kind of generic in a sense, almost across the sector, we like to work together and sort of use our collective muscle in that way.
Oh, thank you. And can I just move it on to talk about the care system today and some of your views about that, starting from the perspective of those receiving care, and ask you a very broad question, if you don't mind. But I'd be fascinated to understand your view about what you think constitutes truly good adult social care, what that looks like. And I suppose the second part of that is what it might take to make that the norm in England and Wales.
Well, no, a very small question to get us going.
Yes, rather wide questions.
Okay, well, I think this is partly why social care is so difficult sometimes, I think, for people to grasp. Because if you had a broken leg, people could envisage how that broken leg might be treated. So, you put it in a cast, or you have an anaesthetic, you do this, there's a sort of set of expected procedures, and there's a kind of clear outcome that you can walk on your leg again. The challenge for social care is that actually everybody who's drawing on care and support has a different goal in a sense from what they're wanting to achieve from that. So it's really difficult to sort of say from a external perspective, in a sense, what good social care looks like is absolutely what it feels like to the individual receiving it. So there's some fundamental tenets of it. So choice and control. So people actually being able to control the way in which when they receive care, how they receive care, the things that they're supported with and the things that they don't need to be supported with. So that choice and control element is huge. There's a very interesting and valuable organisation called Social Care Future, who has spent lots of work working directly with people who draw on care and support, who come up with a kind of vision for social care and what that might look like. And it's all about care being delivered, or people living the life that they want in places that they want, surrounded by the people that they want. So, those kind of ambitions are really important. to have at the centre of it. Having it personalised, so having it very much driven, not person-centred, but person-led. So it's really that the person has got as much control as possible. And I think being ambitious, I think we run a real risk of not being ambitious enough about the kind of changes and transformation that really good social care can have. I have a really privileged role, and I get to go and visit lots of people who are drawing on care and support in settings sometimes or in their own homes. And the stories that I hear from them about just how different their life was before they worked, they received care from that individual to how it's transformed are incredibly moving, incredibly powerful, but also give you a real sense of why we've got to invest properly in this set of services, because with them, people can really achieve their and fulfill their potential. Without them, they're going to struggle.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so I've just been visiting actually some services up in Liverpool where we're running a really exciting test bed there to try and test new innovation and new technology. And there I was meeting people who were working in a horticultural service. So I had this is a classic kind of not-for-profit visiting day. So I went from a reablement service where people were coming out of hospital and getting huge amount of support to a horticultural project which was working with people with learning disability and autism, to a project that was housing people in an old convent. It just kind of the variety is extraordinary. But in the horticultural service, they were working with people who with learning disabilities and autism who were, through that work and through the approach that organisation was taking, it wasn't a sort of volunteering project where people were coming and doing the same thing day in, day out. They were working directly with people, from taking them from the point where plants, the seeds were going in, they were growing the plants, they had a social enterprise there where people with learning disabilities were then part of selling and part of kind of being part of that commerce. They were forming new partnerships with private organisations within the community and looking for supported employment opportunities. They were working with local police and other organisations who were coming in and being part of it. The local neighbours were dropping off plants so that the people who were there could plant them up and sell them in the shop. So they were really at the heart of a very vibrant community. And that sort of work means that person builds relationships, that they have purpose, that they make connections, that they perhaps form relationships, that they have something meaningful to do, that they can look forward to a potential career. And that's hugely exciting and needs to be part of each community.
Thank you. And I mean, it's a very fascinating example of what good care can achieve when it's done.
But it's
properly.
Happening in a greenhouse. It's not happening in a care home. And that's what, and I think that's the challenge for social care all the time, is that people have got a kind of really, if they've got any picture at all, they've got a very singular picture of an older person's care home. And that's part of the picture, and it's hugely important. And I was talking to a member this morning who was telling me, they primarily work in older people's residential care, but their whole focus in that setting is about enriching lives. And that, again, that gives you a really different sort of feel to a set of services. If what they're looking at is saying, how can we put everything into making this person's life better today than it was yesterday? That's really different to what people think of as a kind of care, as a sort of, somewhere where people are not able to do anything independently.
And it's a completely different emphasis on care, away from the cost of it, and the funding of it.
Yes.
And that was really the next thing that I would like to come on to, is to talk about some of the barriers that are stopping us from getting there more widely. And in particular, what you think would be needed to make the local authority funded care provider model more sustainable, but without sacrificing that quality and that sort of massively important human element that you've been talking about?
Well, I mean, there's a pretty simple answer, which is about giving local authorities more money, and that is absolutely part of any picture and any solution. So I think there are so many reports now, whether it's from select committees, whether it's from independent think tanks like the Nuffield Trust or the Health Foundation, whether it's from, previous secretaries of state sitting and talking about the need for additional funding at the COVID inquiry, whatever it might be, there is a universal understanding that it is underfunded as a sector. And I think that married against the demography, the changing demography, the growth of the number of older people, the increasing complex needs of people coming from children's services into adult services, You can't make it work without putting more into the pot. So that, I mean, if you take that to one side and say that is a given, then there are there also are other things that could that are needed ingredients. So we do need a proper workforce strategy for this sector. We need to look at some of the things that have been said and done in relation to health around the 10-year plan, around the health workforce strategy, and think about how we can bring that to the care sector. So we need people who are, so the latest research from Skills for Care showed that whilst the number of vacancies had shrunk slightly within the sector, that was largely through international recruitment, but the domestic labour force had actually shrunk. So people are not coming into this sector seeing it as a career of choice. And that's, I think, because it's less straightforward to see the pathway for education and professional development as it might be in other sectors.
But there are initiatives, aren't there, on at the moment? Is that right?
So there is a workforce strategy that's been developed outside of government that we certainly, NCF and the Care Provider Alliance, have both been part of, but many of the things within that require some government intervention. So if you're going to change, for example, apprenticeships, which previously Care was one of the largest deliverers of apprenticeship opportunities across the economy. And when the changes came in 5 or so years ago, the funding available for care apprenticeships was not sufficient. And so actually the apprenticeship market for not for the level 5, but for sort of levels 2 and 3 has completely dropped away. So we're not even able to utilise the sort of building blocks of skills that are open and available to other parts of the economy. So there are some things that are being thought about in that context, and it's been brought together in a strategy, but it needs some proper government focus on that.
And whilst we're on workforce, can I just ask you about unpaid carers as well, and what immediate policy or other changes you think would make the biggest difference for unpaid carers?
I mean, I think there are lots of clear kind of concerns from organisations like Carers UK and Carers Trust about the kind of level of pressure on unpaid carers. So the Care Act brought in a requirement to offer assessments to unpaid carers, and that to be, because that was a recognition in a sense that actually if the unpaid carers' needs were better met, then their ability to continue to support somebody would be greater. But those unpaid carers assessments have not been happening at the level that they should have. So that means you've got a group of people who we don't have any sight of whether they have particular health or care needs themselves. We don't have a way of sort of universally categorising unpaid carers, so that's not on everybody's health records, for example. I mean, my mother is in a care home, but I'm one of her primary carers. I'm absolutely certain my GP's got no sense of that at all. So if I had health needs that were related to any of that, then they're not going to notice that or flag those. So there's certainly something about recognising them and having a kind of clear picture of that, working out what their assessment needs are, and also understanding that the immediate connection between the delays in assessment that have been happening at a local authority level because of local authority reduction of resources, and what pressure that puts on individuals who are delivering unpaid care. I mean, we now, the threshold for accessing paid care is local authority funded care is the highest it can be within the legislation. So that means that there are very many people who are coping or barely coping at home. And we know from Carers Trust and others that there are lots of people delivering 50 hours plus unpaid care a week, often with little, if any resources being offered to them to support that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it described somewhere, I think, as equivalent to a second NHS.
Yes.
In terms of
scale. In terms of the number of people and who they're supporting. And of course, the really interesting thing about all of that, or the important thing to recognise, is that those people know the most about the individual who receives care. And where does their voice come in determining, how much weight is put on their voice within assessments, for example? How much are they then involved in the future care planning and care delivery? We could be utilising that skill and expertise much more significantly. And also we should be making sure that they feel completely comfortable with what's then being offered instead of them. There's lots of complex emotional issues around caring, guilt, and and have I done enough, and what if I'd done that differently, etc. So actually keeping people informed and updated. So I'm very excited about some of the technology options that enable that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I know that's an area of sort of very specific interest for you.
Yeah,
and how you see technology playing an increasing role in addressing some of these workforce issues, both in terms of paid care and unpaid care going forward, because a lot's said about it, isn't it, as AI is the sort of the solution that's coming over the horizon to all of these problems. But what's your view about that?
Yeah, well, I think it is partly. I mean, I have to say, I do think it's very, very interesting. I mean, I came into this sector from housing, which wasn't necessarily the world's most technologically advanced, but it was a hell of a lot more than care was. So I think it's really interesting to see how quickly actually this as a sector has developed its interest and its focus on technology. And I mean, there's, every cloud silver lining, isn't it? So actually, because there's not vast amounts of legacy system, actually it's quite quick for people to adopt and change and develop. If you try to adopt a new technology in the health service, for example, you're probably having to go back 30, 40 years potentially of systems that you've got to incorporate. We might have to go back 5 years, if that, in some places. So there's that we can leapfrog and make some real progress around this. So I think the things that are going to change from a workforce point of view, we're already seeing lots of that. We had massive adoption of digital care planning, for example, during the pandemic. And what that means is you have got all sorts of things that help the workforce. So if you have a workforce, a larger international workforce, as we do currently, and if English isn't first language, there's lots of potential for translation apps or speak to system apps, which mean you don't have to write things down. You can speed stuff up. You're moving away from a very common system in the care home setting where lots of records were written up at the end of the day. So people are being able to do that instantly. That means there's a better record of care, lots more data, lots more information about individuals. I think you are beginning to see quite widespread adoption, actually, a lot of it driven by local authorities, of sensor-based technology, which is enabling people to have a much clearer understanding of somebody who's living at home and what they're doing and how they are maintaining their independence. How often are they going into the kitchen? How often are they going into the bathroom? How often does the washing machine go on? Does that give an indication of incontinence, for example? Or does it give do you know that somebody's taken their medication because the water's been switched? There's lots of things like that. Now, some people, like me, probably love the potential of that. Others are concerned about what does that mean in terms of, are you going to leave people then isolated and lonely because you're going to take away people rather than care? So I think we've got to have a kind of really grown-up debate about what role we want technology to play, because if we think that we address people's isolation and loneliness by sending a home care worker in 3 times a day, then we're not really kind of got the grip of what being connected to people means. So there's something about how do we have a mature conversation about how technology and humans work together. And I think we're having some of that, but that's partly why we've developed this test bed, because we think actually the AI coming riding over the hill is a really dominant image. And I think what that doesn't allow for is people drawing on care and support and people working at the front line to have a proper say in what they want and what they think should happen. And we think by having this test bed, we'll be able to give people the opportunity to properly test out things, engage with it, be there right at the beginning in the development of it.
Thank you. I was going to ask you a bit later on, but I may as well do it now about one of the shifts in the 10-year health plan announced last month. Last month, wasn't it? Was the move from analog to digital.
Yes. And
the plan for a single patient record and a lot of heavy lifting being placed on the app. And I wondered what sort of opportunities you think having that kind of single point of access to health and care creates for the social care and creates particularly for integration and the opportunities for integration. And I guess my other point on that would be there's quite a lot of reaction around that has been, well, the people who will be expected to be accessing the app and using this kit are people who may be older and may struggle with technology access and skills because they're not sort of native technology users like younger people, and the risk that sort of imposing that digital change might have in widening inequalities for those people. And I was just wondering what your views were around that.
So I think, the kind of fear of digital exclusion has kind of permeated for the last kind of 20 years in all sorts of different about employment and this is the latest iteration of it, I think. So there are lots of tried and tested solutions about how you ensure people are given the right kind of access. But the opportunity, I suppose, in the care setting is that generally people might have somebody who can support them in doing some of that, some opportunities to kind of, even if you need somebody to help you use the app, the opportunity to do some things like reorder prescriptions, to book appointments, to look at your health record, and not have to do that by rocking up at the GP at 8 o'clock in the morning to try and get an appointment we should be thinking about how we ensure everybody can do that. But if people have got a care and support worker, they probably have got some help to do that. I think there are lots of issues about how reliant we become on all of that as our only sort of mechanism for engagement. And I think we need to think about how we build in some safeguards around that. We did some work, interestingly, with a fantastic group down in the Southwest called the Brandon Adventurers, who are a group of people with learning disabilities who are fantastic at kind of advocating for how to ensure services are accessible, how to ensure co-production is at the heart of everything that you do. And so I think for health services, for anybody thinking about developing new technology that they're wanting a wide range of people to use, they need to be looking to talk and work with those kind of groups, because they can tell you, the key issues are going to be around trust. They're going to be, if I want somebody to help me with this, I've got to hand over my phone to them, and then they're going to have and then they're going to have access to my data potentially. So how do you build up that trust? Who's the sensible person to do that with? How do you support somebody to look at that? But where members have been able to access things like GP Connect, for example, through digital care records, that has been enormously valuable, particularly at the point of discharge from hospital, so that they can see what actual treatment somebody's had, what medication they've been prescribed, so they're not turning up with a kind of physical red bag as they used to with all the medication in. They're clear what somebody's recently had, when they've had it, and so forth. So I think there are great opportunities, but of course, like everything, if we don't want people to be left out, we're going to have to invest in supporting them to be engaged. But the benefits, I think, even if there's a resource implication for the health service, the benefits of doing that against having a group of people who essentially remain excluded, even in physical settings, is enormous. So.
Thank you. Can I just move the discussion on to talk a bit about the Casey Commission? Mm-hmm. And for those who are not familiar with that, this is the government-appointed commission that was launched earlier this year in January, I think, that's tasked with crafting the phased 10-year plan to create a national care service, and is going to be reporting in 2 stages, I think. So firstly, with the medium-term blueprint in next year in 2026, and then the full comprehensive plan in 2028. And there's been a lot of discussion in the media and so on, and criticism of that timescale, given that the first recommendations aren't going to land until 2026, and the challenges are urgent now. What practical steps do you think should be taken now, in the next 12 to 18 months, to stop things from getting worse whilst we wait for Baroness Casey to tell us how to fix it all?
So I've just spent the last month actually at the COVID inquiry. So there were quite a large number of recommendations of things that are pandemic orientated that absolutely the government needs to be getting on with now. They include things like a register of care workers. They include things around kind of pandemic preparedness and the involvement of social care. They include the recognition of social care as strategic partners at national and local government levels and health service levels, and they include things like ensuring that unpaid carers, that essential carer role, is recognised so that we don't exclude people going forward. And they include things like kind of proper data architecture for social care. So those things can't wait. And I think hopefully that message has been heard loud and clear by Baroness Hallett at the inquiry, and that government really needs to grasp those. And they can't wait for Louise Casey and her team.
When is Baroness Hallett going to report?
Well, she will report, who knows? But those recommendations, in a sense, are there.
Yes, yeah.
I hope that the tone of her final reflections were she had understood the urgency around this particular area. So let's hope that transforms into some concrete recommendations. So I think you've got those things going on. I mean, the reality is that there are lots of things that are happening right now that have the potential to have a much more fundamental impact on what social care looks like in the future than the things that Baroness Casey might end up looking at. So we've got the Fair Pay Agreement, which is being currently put through the Employment Rights Bill. So when that bill becomes an act, probably in next month or early into the new Parliament, then you've got you're setting out a sort of case for a new set of negotiations around what pay will look like. So the hope is that will address issues around recruitment and retention. It'll build up a sort of maybe some of those issues around parity between health and care staff, etc. So that's going to happen. So that will have a very major impact on employers. You've got 30 different changes in the Employment Rights Bill that will, again, secondary legislation will change that. So that will change the nature of employment. 37% of organisations in the care sector employ 4 staff or less. All of those will have to take on these new employment rights. And I think that the pressure on organisation, I think these things will reshape what the sector looks like, what employment looks like within not just the care sector, but every sector. The Fair Pay Agreement will impact that. We've got local government reorganisation going on that is clearly changing the nature. So we've now got 10 reform councils. We haven't had those before. They've got direct responsibility for the delivery of social care. They're upper tier councils. What will they do? How will they view it and look at it? We're going to have devolved responsibilities, in the areas that go through reorganisation. You'll go from 1 or 2 people controlling social care to potentially 4 or 5. So you're sort of splitting that. You're looking at shifting the balance of ICBs. You're trying to create neighbourhood health services, which have a place and a neighbourhood focus. So all these things have a direct impact on what social care delivery will look like, and ought to have an impact on how it feels to be on the receiving end as an individual. So when Baroness Casey comes to make her short-term recommendations, lots of those things will already be in train. By the time she makes her 28 recommendation, will be probably at the final stages of negotiation around a fair pay agreement. We will have lots of local government that will have reshaped itself. We'll be 2 or 3 years into the 10-year plan, which might have embedded neighbourhood health. So I think the picture will be some of the picture will be set. I hope that she will be talking about some of the fantastic technological developments. I hope she'll be looking at international models as well to see what we can be learning from colleagues. And that's why I'm very interested in that global role. I chair the Global Aging Network and interested in what's happening elsewhere in the world. I hope she'll be looking at how we can ensure that the growing number of older people feel that they have a meaningful opportunity to shape what their future care looks like. And I think those will be, and that she's clear about what is different between working age and older people's services. But lots of the rest of it, I think, might have already been reshaped in front of our eyes.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just pick you up on one point there about the global picture, the international picture, because I know you are the incoming chair of the of the Global Aging Network. And I was just wondering if you would be able to give us some examples of where you have seen things being done internationally, because everyone's got the same demographic pressures, or developed countries generally have the same demographic pressures of the aging population and how best to meet those challenges. Are there a couple of examples you could share of where you have seen different models internationally that you think could help us in the UK?
Yes. So for example, in Singapore, there is a really strong focus for older people, utilising sort of community assets like retirement living spaces or extra care, what we might call extra care type housing or care homes, but utilising them much more explicitly as community hubs for older people. And I don't know if you're familiar with the foyer model. It was a French model for young homeless people. But what that did was bring together a whole range of services into one space. So you wrapped a kind of home, you wrapped services around a home. And that's, in essence, that's what that Singapore model is doing. It's sort of saying, right, come here to our community hub and we'll have exercise classes and we'll have a meal and we'll have chiropody and we'll have, all the specialist expertise that you might want. And by that, you then serve hundreds of people rather than tens of people, or you serve thousands of people rather than hundreds of people. So I think those are so that's a great example in Asia where, clearly Japan, Singapore, South Korea will take over Japan as the oldest population within a decade or so. So looking at areas like that where there is a rapidly growing population. It's interesting, you talked about developing countries, and obviously we work a lot with colleagues in Canada and America and Australia where they have relatively comparable models. They do slightly different things. So in Canada, everybody's entitled to free long-term care, but that means you wait a long time for it and you might not have some of the... So there's lots of, there's pros and cons of lots of different systems, but lots of it would be familiar to people. In Australia, they are developing some really interesting models about small household care settings. So one of the kind of trends in lots of developed countries is bigger and bigger and bigger types of care home, because that's an economies of scale thing. And that's not, and in learning disabilities, certainly in England, it goes smaller and smaller and smaller. So, there's pools in different ways. But we went to the Netherlands recently and we were looking at acoustic monitoring usage for working age adults with learning disabilities. So acoustic monitoring is where you have in your bedroom space usually microphones that can pick up on sounds, and it doesn't record you all the time. It just picks up when you make a sound. And we saw what was in essence a sort of monitoring centre, which was in a central location that was monitoring a couple of thousand people, 4 or 5 staff at night monitoring a couple of thousand people, with some on-site people who could go out and check when there was a need, but they knew who everybody was, so it wasn't strangers they were monitoring. They had a very good, clear understanding of the care plan. They knew how somebody's sleep pattern was, so they could tell when something was different. They knew, for example, if somebody was snoring in one room, that was okay, but if they were snoring in another room, that was potentially a sign that they were going to have an epileptic fit, so somebody went there. So that's another way of sort of thinking about how technology gets used there. So that you've got a kind of developed country that's adopted that, and they've had acoustic monitoring in the Netherlands for probably about 20 years, and we're just getting it here now for falls prevention. And then the final example I would give you is in India, where actually the aging population is just growing at a rate that we could not possibly envisage. I mean, you've gone from having really a very small older population to ones where in urban cities there'll be millions and millions of people over 65 and in rural areas even more challenging, because anybody of working age has moved into the city area, so you've got a group of older people with almost nobody there to protect them, to provide care for them.
People are just living longer, are they? Is that
people are living longer, they're living in health systems better, they've got an infrastructure of a health system. Everybody's living longer and better in that way. So because they don't have an infrastructure of a care system in the same way that we do here, but everybody's got a mobile phone wherever they are, because the technology has been adopted in a way that, it's been essential to be able to function. They can provide a lot more app-based support and care. So you're getting lots of new startups and new developments which are looking at how to, promote brain stimulation, how to support people who are looking after somebody with dementia, for example, to understand what their symptoms might mean, or how better to support them, or how to communicate with them. You've got the development of, I'm going to say that I can't remember the name now, but dementia communication apps that are coming forward that are good to engage people with. And we've got a bit of this happening in the UK, but it's happening in larger chunks elsewhere. Medication robots that are helping people to get medication at the right time and dispense within their home. So So I think what's happening in other bits of the world are vital for us to look at, so that we can take the best of those and think about how it's working. The other big impact is, of course, what we've done traditionally here is to draw on an international workforce. And from parts of the world which didn't have an aging population in the same way, well, they now do. And so you're seeing either there being people who traditionally might have come to the UK from the Philippines or other countries are not able to do that now because of visa restrictions and other things. And there are other parts of the world like China who, for example, have suddenly got a very significant aging population, with having had and a much smaller working age population in relation, so are looking to utilise international recruitment in a way that we might have done previously, but those opportunities aren't available.
That's going to put pressure on international recruitment here.
Well, and I think in domestic, I think the pull, we've seen some of that talked about in health services.
Of course.
But I think we'll see that in skilled and expert carers that we have here too.
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like it's going to be a very interesting role for you.
No, it is fascinating, actually. It is fascinating, yeah.
Incredible. And so much potential and so much opportunity there as well.
Yes, and I think things like the AI you mentioned earlier, of course, everybody is looking for that as a bit of a panacea, but that the opportunities to learn from each other internationally in that space are really important. And I just mentioned about the research communities. So there's some very, partly through the Global Ageing Network, but also through our connections in NCF with a wide range of universities, there is lots of potential for academic research to now be much more global. So there's a global observatory on long-term care that's run by Adelina Comas-Harris from LSE, I think. Apologies if I got the university wrong. And that is really important, because what you've now got is this opportunity for academics across the globe to bring together elements of research that are, all focused on the same thing. So if it's all around falls prevention, for example, or if it's about nutrition for working age adults with a learning disability or whatever, you can bring that all together into one space and compare research in a way that we haven't had that sort of global connectedness before. And that certainly is a positive legacy from COVID, because during COVID, academics did a lot of that initial work to kind of come together, and that's sustained, which is positive.
Yeah, thank you. Just to bring it back to the UK, I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. The first one is around the 10-year NHS plan and the 3 shifts in that plan. We talked briefly about the analog to digital, and I think much of what you've been saying just now touches on the shift from hospital to community, and whether you see that being aligned with what you would hope would be the direction of travel for adult care going forward.
Yes. I mean, I think adult social care obviously is in the community. So there are lots of different ways in which it gets delivered within the community. And I think that is a really important shift to make. I think it's a very difficult political shift to make. And I welcome the government's attempts to focus on that, but people are very keen on their hospitals, and it's very political to try and close down a hospital or reduce resources from hospitals. So I do think we need to be really clear if it's not a hospital, what is it and how does it properly replicate what people imagine happens within a hospital? I think the opportunity for social care in that is that we can utilise some of that shift to recognise the skills and expertise of our workers. So what underlying that shift from acute to community is a set of expectations around the role that social care will play in delegated healthcare tasks, for example, an area of great interest for lots of providers. And there's been lots of talk about that, and a framework's been developed, and all sorts of things again in COVID around sort of diabetes management, wound management, etc., that kind of were delegated because of the practicalities of staff attending. But what didn't happen then, and what still hasn't happened yet, is the shift of resourcing. So if you're going to say, that somebody can be discharged to a virtual ward in a care home, and their care home will do all the wound management or the blood pressure monitoring or the, whatever it might be, and enter it into the app, and somebody back in the hospital says, yes, that person's all right, or no, they need an intervention. You need to resort, you would have had to have them in hospital. They're not in hospital now. You need to resource.
If you don't have that investment, it's just going to increase pressure on the.
It's going to increase pressure. It's going, and it transfers all the risk without the kind of resource and infrastructure that sits behind it.
It raises interesting implications about liability and indemnity and insurance and all of those things.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. So it raises all those questions, and I think for the person on the receiving end, I'm sure delivered appropriately, it's the right thing, because they're either back home or they're back somewhere that's familiar with them. And being in hospital, if you've got dementia, is not a great experience for anybody, for family or anything else. If you're living in your own home and you can get back home, there's lots of sort of focus on how that will improve your recovery. So yes, you need the shift, I think, is absolutely where social care would see that it's right to do, because it recognises that's where bringing care and healthcare close to where people are is much more beneficial for those individuals. But you need to resource it properly. You need to get the supervision right. You need to get a line of sight in place. And technology, again, of course, does a lot of that. The fact that you could telepresence almost there's a great project, be interested in Nottingham, called Robotics for Good, which is all about telepresence robots, which can then come and, so you could bring that sort of approach to enable all sorts of broader GP interventions and huge amounts of opportunity in that space, which would mitigate some of those risk elements that are attached to it. But I think where we are right now, the words are there, but the properly resourced delivery program is yet to emerge.
And is that the sort of thing that you would expect Baroness Casey to be looking at? Well,
I think the risk is that is that because she gets kind of, she's looking at social care, that's seen as a health function, but she will need to see the richness of all the expectations. I mean, part of the story of social care is the changing needs of the people who receive care and support. So whilst it might have been the case that 10 years ago somebody might receive social care but have very little health interaction, it's much less likely that that's the case. Many people will be living with multiple comorbidities. Many people will have, complex mental health problems that they need support around. So it's very likely that there will be a connection between the two and And you talked about the terminology of integration. I mean, that is a very, very long-held ambition. And part of the challenge of meeting that ambition has been that we are culturally obsessed with acute provision, whereas actually the way we live our lives means that the opportunities for prevention and lower level, earlier intervention are probably much more straightforward and definitely much more impactful than waiting for the old adage of falling off the cliff and the fence direction of course. And again, that's great as a set of words, but it's against a backdrop of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services saying, this is the lowest, I can't remember how they frame it, but the lowest level of confidence about their ability to invest in prevention since they've been doing the survey, So they're not seeing their budgets enabling them to put in place the preventative things that will facilitate some of that shift. And we took out a large chunk of prevention when we lost lots of the specialist funding around supported housing, for example, where people who might have been able to be supported for a long time within supported housing have ended up not getting that support and then tipping into more acute care regulated services.
Yeah, I mean, it struck me when I read the 10-year plan that it's all good words, as you say, but it's very idealistic, isn't it? And in terms, and I did think recurrently, how is this going to be funded?
Yes.
Where's the money coming from?
Well, I think the answer probably from the 10-year plan cohort will be that the funding comes from the shift. So, but you need to get, you need to depoliticize the shift, I think, in a way, and that in a sense, my understanding is that that's what the 10-year plan engagement program was supposed to do. So people were supposed to feel they had an opportunity to say what they wanted, and this is what people wanted. I think because of the other things that have subsequently happened, for example, the change in local government, complexity of those kind of things, I think people will feel they've had another say about how they want things to be run, and maybe that isn't what they want. It's of course it's a 10-year plan, and we're talking about it 2 months in. So give it a chance.
Give it a go. Yeah.
But I think it is that kind of mature conversation which says if we're going to do this differently. And I think the biggest point for me in all of that is the only way that any of this can be delivered is social care is seen as a strategic partner. So if when you want to say we're going to only treat people so not in this plan, but in a previous plans exist, there was something about trying to really focus in on what could be delivered in day surgery. So where people had traditionally gone home, stayed in hospital for 2 or 3 days, are going to try and bring all that down to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, leave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, job done. Well, usually it's not job done because that's why you stayed for 2 or 3 days in hospital. So if you want to properly do that, you probably need, because lots of people live on their own, we've got 1 million plus people who are aging without children and that will only increase and increase. So you've got lots of people who don't have anybody who can deliver the unpaid care role. So if you want to meaningfully do that, you need to sit with people who could then offer that reablement or that support at home or the wraparound home care or whatever it might be, and fund them to do that, but also have a strategic conversation with them which says, if you deliver this, we will ensure that you have 20 people that come through your books over the next month. Not we'll buy 3 days from you here, and then in 2 weeks' time we might buy another 3 days from you. Because how do you keep the skilled staff? How do you keep the show on the road? You couldn't run a hospital like that. It has a fixed budget and grant, whether there's 2 people on the ward or there's 10 people on the ward. So you can't run care services like that. So you need to treat them as strategic partners who've got expertise, skills, and something to offer, not as something you can turn off and on when you fancy it. And I think that's unfortunately where sometimes providers feel that they are in that kind of food chain of importance.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. Can I just finish off by asking you briefly about the CQC? And certainly it's a topic that we hear a lot from people that we're working with in the sector, and around some of the well-publicised challenges that registered providers have encountered with the new single assessment framework, particularly around registration and understanding inspections and so on. And we're all familiar with the Dash report last year and the criticisms that were made, and that changes have been implemented in the light of those. And I just wanted to know what your take is on whether the single assessment framework is still presenting providers with those challenges, and the extent to which some of those may have been addressed now and improved.
Yes. So alongside the Penny Dash review, the Care Provider Alliance actually was commissioned to do a review of the single assessment framework from a care provider perspective. So there was a lot of critique of how that was working in practice. And the core things that were around was about the volume of the quality statements, the sort of lack of clarity about what actually anybody was looking for that within those, the lack of sector-specific kind of understanding that sat behind them, loss of relationship management, experience of inspection, delay, problems with the data and the portals and all of that. So there was, those views have been put forward to the CQC. I think, as you say, there's been lots of listening that's been going on and expressions of kind of new broom and, new chief exec, new board, new chief inspectors. So I think what providers want is really good regulation that they can rely on. They haven't had that. They are expecting that. And I guess we should be seeing some of the kind of outputs we're a year on from Penny Dash's first cut of her report. So I think people are now really wanting to see some changes. My understanding from members is that around registration, those things have improved. So timescales have improved around that. So that's really positive. We know that there's been piloting of relationship managers, and those who've been part of that have seen that as a really good step back to what there was before. I know that there's kind of commitment to relook at the number of statements and work on those. So Care Provider Alliance is going to continue to be engaged in that work. So I think that's positive, that there's an opportunity to properly hear directly from providers as they make those changes. But it's clearly one of the biggest areas that members are focused on, that we need a credible regulator that the government has faith in as well as the public has faith in. And I think those are two different things. And I don't know which way the regulator is focusing their attention, but they need to build up both of those again, and one that's credible with the workforce, because, yes, the public think about who they want to provide care through ratings, but so do the workforce. Think about where they want to go and whether they want to stay places through that as well. So there's a need for something Phoenix-like to rise up pretty rapidly.
It's business critical. It is, isn't it? You need to have a reliable and reputable regulator.
Yes,
and it's in everyone's interests.
It is, and I think that's it is in nobody's interest for the whole thing to kind of implode either. So I think, I'm keen to kind of continue a constructive working relationship. It's
in insurers' interests as well.
Absolutely.
The amount of reliance that's placed on those reports is,
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm hopeful that we'll continue to see some of the wider issues, as you say, the registration, the kind of understanding of when inspection's going to happen, those kind of things improve. But there's some fundamental things about the SAF that are, I understand, in progress to change. But timescales that was the very early critique that, it's fine to say there's a rescue plan, but what are the timescales attached with it? And I think for providers, there's a little bit of that kind of, you wouldn't let us get away with an action plan without timescales. So why are you any different?
Fair point. Well, I think that's all the questions that I had for you this morning. I'd just like to say thank you very much, Vic, for coming on to Altair Talks and for sparing your time and providing us with your absolutely unique and fascinating insights. My take home from it is that it's an exciting space to be in. There's a lot of change and potential for change, as well as the challenges. And I think that has come across very strongly today. So thank you so much for taking time. And I wish you all the best in your new role as well. That sounds absolutely fascinating. And maybe we can have you back on the podcast in a year or two to see how far down the track it's all got.
Great. That'd be lovely. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Altair Talks. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review on whatever platform you're listening on, as this helps spread the word. If you have any questions or comments or topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes, please do contact us, as we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on LinkedIn or visit our website at www.altairinsurance.com. Stay tuned for more episodes, and until next time, take care of yourselves. The information contained in this podcast is not intended to represent a complete analysis of the topics presented and is provided for information purposes only for practitioners in the UK. It's not intended as legal advice, and no responsibility can be accepted by Altair or the National Care Forum for any reliance placed upon it. Independent legal advice should always be obtained before applying any information to particular circumstances.